Have you ever found yourself trapped in an endless argument with your own thoughts? Perhaps you replay that awkward conversation from last week, meticulously overanalyze a tiny mistake, or convince yourself that everything is about to crumble into chaos. And the most unsettling part, it all happens within the confines of your own mind. Your inner voice, that constant companion, can be your greatest ally, a source of unwavering support, or your most relentless adversary, a harsh critic that erodes your confidence. It can elevate you like a seasoned coach before a championship game, or it can tear you down with the ferocity of the world's most scathing critic. Here's the critical truth. Most people allow their inner voice to run rampant, completely unchecked, like an untrained dog dragging them through the mud every single day. But what if you could reclaim control? What if, instead of being a prisoner to your thoughts, you could transform your inner dialogue into a weapon for strength, confidence, and unshakable mental clarity? This isn't mere wishful thinking. The ancient Stoics, some of history's most brilliant minds, understood how to master their inner world long before modern psychology even had a name for it. They grasped a truth that eludes most. You don't have to believe everything you think. That little voice in your head, it's not always right. If you don't learn to control it, it will control you. It will make you doubt yourself, second-guess your decisions, and steal your peace of mind. It will sabotage your confidence before you even step onto the battlefield of life. But here's the empowering news. You can rewire your mind, train your inner voice, and unlock a level of mental strength that 99% of people never reach. You can recognize when your inner voice is lying to you and learn how to stop it in its tracks. You can break free from the cycle of overthinking that keeps you up at night. You can transform your inner critic into an unstoppable source of motivation. And you can achieve all of this using powerful Stoic principles combined with modern techniques that are proven to work. By the time you're finished with this exploration, you won't just understand how to silence negativity. You'll know how to use your mind as a fortress of strength, resilience, and clarity. Once you learn to master your inner voice, you'll never perceive yourself or the world the same way again. And before we dive into the depths of controlling your inner voice, take a moment. If you're finding this insightful, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share this with anyone who could benefit. Your support helps us bring you more content like this. Before we delve into the techniques for controlling your inner voice, it's crucial to understand what it truly is and why it wields such immense power over you. Most people navigate life without ever questioning that voice in their head. It dictates who they are, what they can and cannot do, and how they should feel about themselves and the world. And they listen, accepting every thought as truth, every fear as reality, and every criticism as a final verdict. But here's a revelation that escapes most. That voice isn't you. It may sound like you, it may feel like the real you, but it is not. It is a collection of thoughts, emotions, past experiences, fears, and beliefs shaped by your upbringing, society, and the people around you. It is influenced by everything you've ever been told, every failure you've experienced, and every insecurity you've absorbed. That voice is not always speaking truth. It is often merely repeating what it has been trained to say. If you don't recognize this, you will live your entire life at its mercy, believing every self-doubt, every anxious thought, and every moment of fear as if they are indisputable facts. This internal dialogue is one of the most powerful forces in your life. It can either mold you into someone strong, confident, and resilient, or it can keep you trapped in cycles of hesitation, insecurity, and emotional instability. It affects everything: your emotions, your confidence, your decisions, and ultimately, the life you create. Every success, every failure, every missed opportunity is in some way linked to how you speak to yourself internally. The problem is, most people never take the time to question where this voice originates, whether it's serving them, or how they can take control of it. When you understand how your inner voice operates, you gain something that few people ever will: the ability to separate yourself from it. And once you do that, you gain control over something that controls almost everyone else. This is the first step to mental strength, the ability to stand outside of your own thoughts, to see them objectively, and to decide what you will and won't accept as truth. Your inner voice is not just random noise, it has a purpose, and that purpose has been shaped over time by evolution, psychology, and personal experience. It exists because at some point it helped you survive. Your ancestors, who constantly thought about potential dangers, who worried about whether they had enough resources, who second-guessed their decisions, those were the ones who avoided threats and stayed alive. This internal dialogue was meant to keep you alert, cautious, and aware of potential risks. But what was once a survival mechanism can now become a prison. The same thought process that kept early humans safe from wild animals now keeps modern humans stuck in cycles of stress, anxiety, and self-doubt. The mind is wired to focus more on danger than on success, more on what could go wrong than on what could go right. This is called negativity bias, and it's one of the main reasons people struggle with their inner voice. It's easier for the brain to replay failures than successes, to predict disasters rather than visualize triumphs. Your mind believes it's keeping you safe by constantly pointing out your weaknesses, reminding you of past mistakes, and warning you against anything uncertain. But instead of protecting you, it's often keeping you small. This is why many people feel stuck in life. Their thoughts hold them back before they even take action. The fear of embarrassment stops them from speaking up. The memory of a past failure prevents them from trying again. The doubt in their own ability keeps them from stepping into new opportunities. The mind is powerful, but it doesn't always work in your favor. If you don't take control of it, it will control you. The inner voice is not just about self-talk. It's the filter through which you experience life. Two people can face the same challenge, but their internal dialogue will determine how they respond. One person might say, "I've failed before, so I'll probably fail again," while the other says, "I've failed before, but I learned, so now I can do better." The event is the same, the experience is the same. The only difference is the conversation happening inside their head. One leads to hesitation, the other to resilience. This internal dialogue doesn't just influence emotions, it shapes confidence. The way you speak to yourself determines whether you build belief in yourself or destroy it. Confidence isn't something people are born with. It's built one thought at a time. Every time you tell yourself you are capable, that you can handle difficulty, that you are strong, you are reinforcing an identity of resilience. Every time you tell yourself you're not good enough, that you always mess up, that you never succeed, you're reinforcing an identity of failure. Over time, these thoughts turn into patterns, and those patterns turn into self-perception. Your self-image isn't based on reality, it's based on repetition. If you tell yourself the same thing over and over, it will become your truth. A person who constantly repeats that they are bad at speaking in public will believe it, even if they have never actually tried. A person who constantly tells themselves they are socially awkward will act that way, even if no one else sees them that way. The more you say something to yourself, the more your brain will accept it as reality. This is why your inner voice is the foundation of all decision-making. The choices you make are a direct reflection of what you believe about yourself. If you think you are capable, you will take action. If you think you are unworthy, you will hesitate. The difference between people who take bold action and those who stay stuck in the same patterns is not intelligence, talent, or opportunity. It's the voice they listen to. The good news is that your inner voice is not fixed. It's not a permanent script that you're forced to follow for life. It can be changed. The way you speak to yourself can be reprogrammed, and the moment you realize this, you step into power that most people will never access. You have the ability to challenge your own thoughts, to question the narratives that hold you back, and to rewrite the way you communicate with yourself. You are not at the mercy of your emotions or your past experiences. You are not stuck with the same negative patterns forever. You can learn to recognize when your inner voice is working against you, and you can change it. This is the foundation of mental strength. It's not about suppressing emotions or pretending to be positive all the time. It's about understanding how your mind works so that you can take control of it rather than letting it control you. It's about developing the ability to step back from your thoughts, to see them for what they are, just thoughts, not reality, and to choose which ones you accept. The Stoics understood this better than anyone. They knew that true power was not in controlling the outside world, but in mastering the inner world. They trained themselves to separate from their emotions, to view challenges with objectivity, and to speak to themselves in a way that built resilience rather than weakness. They did not allow fear to dictate their actions, nor did they allow negative thoughts to shape their reality. They saw their inner voice as a tool to be sharpened, not a dictator to be obeyed. And this is what you're going to learn. You're going to learn how to take control of your inner voice, how to rewire your thoughts, how to break free from patterns of self-doubt, and how to turn your mind into your greatest source of strength. You are going to learn how to use the same principles that have been practiced by some of the strongest minds in history, so that instead of being controlled by your thoughts, you become the one in control. The moment you realize that your inner voice is not an absolute truth, but a narrative shaped by past experiences, emotions, and conditioning, everything changes. Understanding that you have the power to challenge, refine, and even rewrite that voice is the first step. But knowing that your thoughts are not always facts is not enough. You also need to recognize when your inner voice is helping you and when it's harming you. Not all internal dialogue is bad. In fact, self-talk can be one of the most powerful tools for resilience, confidence, and clarity. It can propel you forward in moments of doubt, help you regulate emotions under stress, and sharpen your decision-making in high-pressure situations. But there's a fine line between self-talk that strengthens you and internal chatter that weakens you. The challenge lies in recognizing the difference before your thoughts spiral out of control. Self-talk is intentional. It's a dialogue with yourself that has a purpose, whether it's to motivate, reflect, or problem solve. It's structured, rational, and often solution-oriented. People who use self-talk effectively know how to regulate their emotions by speaking to themselves with clarity and discipline. When something goes wrong, instead of collapsing into emotional turmoil, they engage in self-talk that helps them process the situation, analyze solutions, and move forward. Chatter, on the other hand, is chaotic. It's the endless loop of thoughts that don't lead to resolution, but instead amplify stress, doubt, and hesitation. It's when the mind replays a mistake over and over, dissecting every detail as if that will change the past. It's when thoughts jump from one worry to another with no end, creating unnecessary mental noise. Chatter is what keeps people awake at night, consumed by hypothetical scenarios and worst-case outcomes. Unlike self-talk, which has direction and intention, chatter is an uncontrolled storm of thoughts that offer no clarity, only confusion. The difference between the two is not just about content, but about control. Self-talk is a conversation you lead, while chatter is a conversation that controls you. One helps you process emotions, the other intensifies them. One creates solutions, the other creates problems that don't even exist. When people fail to recognize this difference, they become trapped in their own thoughts, mistaking over-analysis for reflection and rumination for problem-solving. Chatter often disguises itself as productive thinking, but it's nothing more than mental noise that drains energy. A person may believe that replaying a conversation repeatedly will help them gain insight, but in reality, it only deepens frustration. They may think that worrying excessively about the future will prepare them, but in truth, it only paralyzes action. The more one indulges in chatter, the more overwhelming life feels. Thoughts become tangled, making even simple decisions exhausting. One of the greatest dangers of chatter is that it creates emotional amplification. When negative thoughts are left unchecked, they intensify emotions. A single moment of embarrassment can turn into days of shame. A small setback can feel like a complete failure. A minor conflict can be exaggerated into a catastrophe. The more the mind fixates on a thought, the stronger the emotional response becomes. What starts as a simple concern escalates into anxiety, frustration, or even hopelessness. Self-talk, in contrast, is about regulation. It doesn't suppress emotions, but allows them to be processed in a way that maintains perspective. When something negative happens, self-talk acknowledges it, but doesn't let it spiral into unnecessary suffering. Instead of fueling emotional reactions, it works to calm them. Rather than letting fear dictate actions, it challenges fear with rational thought. When emotions start to cloud judgment, self-talk steps in as an internal guide, bringing clarity back into focus. Understanding this difference is not just about improving mental well-being, but about gaining mastery over thought patterns. Those who develop strong self-talk habits create mental environments where resilience thrives, while those who let chatter dominate their minds become prisoners of their own anxieties. The ability to shift from chatter to self-talk is what separates those who feel overwhelmed from those who remain composed under pressure. The key to controlling this shift is awareness. Most people are so used to their internal dialogue that they don't even question whether it's constructive or destructive. They assume that thinking is always helpful, without realizing that not all thoughts serve a purpose. By developing the ability to observe thoughts, rather than automatically engaging with them, it becomes easier to recognize when the mind is spiraling into unproductive chatter. A crucial distinction between the two is the way they handle uncertainty. Self-talk is grounded in the present, addressing problems with a practical mindset. Chatter, however, thrives on speculation. It constantly asks "what if" in ways that don't lead to solutions, but rather to endless anxiety. When the mind becomes consumed with scenarios that haven't even happened, stress is created out of thin air. The future becomes a source of fear rather than possibility. Another defining characteristic of chatter is its tendency to repeat. Unlike self-talk, which moves forward, chatter loops in circles. The same thoughts replay endlessly, never arriving at new conclusions. This is why chatter is so exhausting. It drains mental energy without providing any resolution. Self-talk, on the other hand, has momentum. It processes emotions and moves toward action rather than keeping the mind stuck in over-analysis. One of the most effective ways to shift from chatter to self-talk is through externalization. Thoughts become overwhelming when they stay locked inside the mind, but putting them into words, whether through speaking or writing, helps create distance. A problem that seems impossible to solve mentally often becomes clearer when articulated. This is why structured reflection, whether through journaling or intentional conversation, is a powerful tool for mental clarity. When thoughts remain unspoken, they multiply without order. But when they are expressed, they can be examined with logic rather than emotion. Another powerful method is reframing. Chatter often distorts reality by focusing only on negative aspects, while self-talk works to reframe situations in ways that restore balance. A rejection can be seen as a personal failure, or it can be reframed as an opportunity for growth. A difficult challenge can be seen as overwhelming, or it can be reframed as a chance to build resilience. The mind tends to default to the most emotionally charged interpretation, but with practice it can be trained to shift perspective in ways that support mental strength rather than weaken it. One of the reasons chatter is so difficult to escape is that it thrives in stillness. When the mind is unoccupied, it fills the void with mental noise. This is why overthinking is most common during idle moments, late at night, during long commutes, or in moments of solitude. One of the simplest yet most effective strategies to counteract this is movement. Physical activity interrupts looping thoughts by engaging the body and shifting focus. Even something as simple as a walk can break the cycle of mental repetition, giving thoughts the space to settle rather than spiral. The influence of the external environment on internal dialogue cannot be ignored. Surroundings shape thoughts, whether consciously or unconsciously. When the environment is filled with negativity, whether through toxic relationships, excessive media consumption, or constant stress, the mind absorbs that energy. Chatter thrives in environments of chaos, while self-talk is strengthened in environments of order. This is why it's crucial to be intentional about what is consumed mentally and emotionally. Just as a cluttered space creates distraction, a cluttered mental environment makes constructive self-talk difficult. Self-talk is a skill that can be developed. Like any discipline, it requires practice. The more conscious one becomes of internal dialogue, the easier it is to shift patterns from chatter to clarity. The key is not to eliminate all negative thoughts, but to prevent them from taking control. By recognizing when the mind is falling into destructive loops, it becomes possible to redirect focus toward thoughts that build confidence, resilience, and emotional stability. Understanding this difference is not just about mental clarity, but about taking back power. Those who master self-talk don't live at the mercy of their emotions. They don't allow doubt to paralyze them, nor do they let fear dictate their choices. They use their thoughts as tools for strength, not sources of suffering. They have trained themselves to respond to challenges with logic rather than panic, to setbacks with resilience rather than self-destruction, and to uncertainty with clarity rather than fear. Developing this ability is one of the most valuable mental skills a person can acquire. It's the foundation for emotional intelligence, decision-making, and personal growth. Those who refine their internal dialogue gain a level of self-control that most people will never experience. It's not about silencing emotions, but about managing them in a way that leads to wisdom rather than distress. It's about learning to use the mind as an ally rather than an enemy. Those who accomplish this gain a level of mental freedom that allows them to navigate life with clarity, strength, and unshakable confidence. The way you speak to yourself determines the life you live. Every thought, every belief, every internal dialogue either strengthens you or weakens you. There's no middle ground. Once you begin to recognize the difference between self-talk and destructive chatter, the next step is learning how to reshape those thoughts into something that fuels resilience rather than self-doubt. The truth is, most people aren't defeated by external circumstances. They're defeated by the voice inside their head that tells them they're not good enough, that they always fail, that they'll never be capable of real change. But the reality is that voice isn't truth. It's a habit, and like any habit, it can be broken and rebuilt into something stronger. Negative self-talk doesn't appear out of nowhere. It's the result of years of conditioning, past failures, societal expectations, and unconscious fears. It's often absorbed in childhood, reinforced through setbacks, and repeated until it becomes automatic. The mind, left unchecked, will always default to self-preservation, which means avoiding risks, focusing on mistakes, and fixating on everything that could go wrong. But what the mind sees as protection often becomes limitation. When negative self-talk takes control, it doesn't keep you safe. It keeps you small. It creates an invisible barrier between you and everything you are capable of becoming. The Stoics understood this long before modern psychology existed. They knew that thoughts had the power to shape not only emotions but also actions. They trained themselves to separate from destructive self-perception, to challenge their own assumptions, and to reframe adversity as an opportunity for growth rather than a reason for despair. The ability to master this process is not just about improving mental well-being. It's about building a mind that cannot be shaken, no matter what circumstances arise. Reframing negative self-talk begins with awareness. Most people don't even realize how often they tear themselves down. The words they say to themselves become so ingrained that they feel like objective reality rather than personal interpretation. Statements like, "I am terrible at this," "I will always be this way," or "I can never succeed," aren't facts, they're stories. And any story can be rewritten. The first step is to catch these patterns in real time. The moment a self-defeating thought arises, pause. Look at it for what it is, a learned response, not an undeniable truth. Once awareness is developed, the next step is to challenge the validity of those thoughts. The Stoics had a practice of questioning their own assumptions, refusing to accept surface-level emotions as absolute. When a thought like, "I'm not good enough," arises, they would examine it with logic. What evidence supports this claim? Is it true in every situation or only in isolated moments? Has there ever been a time when the opposite was true? By forcing the mind to confront its own narratives, the emotional weight behind them begins to dissolve. A belief that goes unchallenged will always feel real. A belief that is questioned loses its power. Another essential part of reframing is shifting perspective. The way an event is interpreted determines its impact. A failure can be seen as a reflection of incompetence or as a lesson in resilience. A rejection can be seen as proof of worthlessness or as redirection towards something better. The event itself doesn't change, only the perception of it does. The Stoics mastered the ability to detach from immediate emotions and see the bigger picture. They understood that no single setback defines a person, no moment of weakness determines lifelong potential, and no temporary struggle has the power to break someone unless they allow it to. Language plays a crucial role in reframing self-talk. The words used internally shape identity and perception. A simple shift in phrasing can alter the entire emotional weight of a situation. Instead of saying "I failed," shifting to "I am learning" changes the narrative from defeat to progress. Instead of "I am not good at this," replacing it with "I am improving every time I try," creates a mindset of growth rather than limitation. Words have power, and the way they are used internally will determine whether the mind becomes an ally or an enemy. The Stoics also emphasized emotional detachment from thoughts. They understood that not every internal reaction deserves attention. When negative self-talk arises, the goal isn't to suppress it, but to step back from it. Observing a thought without attaching to it removes its influence. Instead of engaging with self-criticism, it can simply be acknowledged as noise. The mind generates countless thoughts every day. Most of them are meaningless. Learning to see them as passing clouds rather than absolute truths gives freedom from their control. Another effective technique in reframing negative self-talk is reinterpreting discomfort. The mind instinctively resists anything that feels difficult, associating discomfort with failure or inadequacy. But the Stoics saw difficulty as a sign of growth. Instead of viewing challenges as evidence of inability, they saw them as training. Struggle wasn't a reason to doubt oneself, but proof that progress was happening. Reframing negative thoughts about difficulty into thoughts of preparation builds resilience. Instead of, "This is too hard for me," the mindset shifts to, "This is making me stronger." Instead of, "I am struggling," it becomes, "I am developing." Building mental strength also requires changing the internal tone of self-talk. The way the mind speaks to itself affects emotional response. Harsh, critical tones create stress and hesitation. A more composed, constructive tone creates confidence. Speaking to oneself with the same patience and encouragement that would be given to a close friend allows for growth rather than self-destruction. The Stoics practiced self-discipline in their words, both spoken and unspoken. They avoided unnecessary harshness, not out of weakness, but because they understood that negativity doesn't create strength, composure does. Another strategy for reframing self-talk is focusing on present action rather than past mistakes. The mind often fixates on what went wrong, replaying past failures and using them as proof of inadequacy. But dwelling on the past doesn't change it. The Stoics believed in directing energy toward what can be controlled, and the only thing that can be controlled is the present moment. Instead of engaging in self-talk about what should have been done differently, the focus shifts to what can be done now. Regret and guilt lose their power when they are replaced with action. Developing mental strength through reframing isn't about forced positivity. It isn't about pretending everything is fine or ignoring difficulties. It's about training the mind to process events in a way that strengthens rather than weakens it. It's about choosing interpretations that build resilience instead of narratives that fuel self-doubt. The ability to control thoughts is the ability to control emotions, and the ability to control emotions is the foundation of mental strength. One of the most important lessons in reframing self-talk is learning to embrace imperfection. The mind often demands unrealistic standards, punishing itself for any perceived weakness. But perfection doesn't exist, and the pursuit of it only leads to frustration. The Stoics accepted human limitations not as failures, but as natural conditions. They didn't engage in self-talk that demanded flawlessness. They engaged in self-talk that encouraged perseverance despite flaws. Recognizing that setbacks, mistakes, and doubts are part of growth allows for self-talk that is constructive rather than self-destructive. Reframing negative self-talk is an ongoing practice. It isn't something that happens instantly, but something that is trained over time. Every moment of self-awareness, every shift in perspective, every conscious decision to change an internal narrative builds mental strength. With consistency, negative self-talk loses its grip. It no longer has the power to dictate emotions, limit actions, or define identity. The Stoics didn't allow their thoughts to control them. They mastered the art of controlling their thoughts. Mastering self-talk is mastering the self. The ability to turn self-criticism into self-discipline, fear into preparation, and doubt into action is the difference between those who remain trapped in their own minds and those who rise above their circumstances. Every person has the ability to train their mind, to reshape their internal dialogue, and to build a mental state that cannot be broken. Those who commit to this process gain a level of control over their lives that most will never experience. and the ones who master it become unstoppable. Reframing negative self-talk is a powerful skill, but mastering the mind requires something even deeper: the ability to step outside of thoughts altogether. Thoughts come and go, but the problem is, most people don't see them for what they are. They get pulled into every fear, every doubt, every frustration, as if thoughts were absolute truths rather than passing mental events. The strongest minds aren't those who eliminate negative thoughts, but those who know how to see them without being consumed by them. This is the essence of mental distancing. Most people are too close to their thoughts. They identify with every emotion as if it defines who they are. When anxiety arises, they say, "I am anxious," rather than "anxiety is present in my mind right now." When self-doubt appears, they believe it's a reflection of their capabilities rather than a temporary reaction. The inability to separate from thoughts is what creates suffering. It's not the thoughts themselves that cause distress, but the attachment to them. The more a person fuses with their thoughts, the more they are controlled by them. Mental distancing is the practice of stepping back and observing thoughts rather than engaging with them. It's the ability to recognize a thought without believing it, to acknowledge an emotion without being ruled by it. The Stoics understood this well. They knew that emotions and thoughts were natural, but they also knew that reacting to them blindly led to unnecessary pain. Instead of suppressing emotions or being overwhelmed by them, they practiced detachment. They trained themselves to see thoughts with the same neutrality as an outside observer. The key to mental distancing is understanding that thoughts aren't instructions, they're merely suggestions. A thought saying, "I can't handle this," doesn't mean it's true. A thought saying, "This situation is unbearable," isn't an objective fact. The problem is, most people never question their thoughts. They take them at face value, even when they're irrational. A mind that is left unchecked becomes a source of suffering, but a mind that's observed loses its power to dictate emotions. One of the most effective ways to practice mental distancing is through labeling thoughts. Instead of saying, "I am stressed," reframe it to, "My mind is generating stressful thoughts." Instead of saying, "I am a failure," shift to, "My brain is experiencing a self-critical thought." This small shift creates distance. It removes personal identity from the thought and allows it to be seen objectively. The moment a thought is labeled, it begins to lose its grip. It's no longer something that defines reality, but something that is simply passing through the mind. Another way to create mental distance is by viewing thoughts as external events rather than internal truths. A person doesn't control when a bird flies past them or when a cloud moves across the sky. Similarly, thoughts arise and pass without conscious effort. They appear, stay for a moment, and then fade unless they are held onto. The mind is constantly producing thoughts, but only the ones that are engaged with persist. Observing thoughts rather than fighting them allows them to move naturally rather than turning into mental battles. Stoic detachment teaches that emotions aren't enemies, they're indicators. They provide information, but they don't have to dictate actions. Feeling anger doesn't mean acting on anger. Feeling fear doesn't mean retreating. The ability to observe emotions rather than react to them is one of the highest forms of mental strength. This doesn't mean suppressing emotions, but rather recognizing them for what they are: temporary experiences, not defining truths. Perspective is another crucial aspect of mental distancing. Many problems feel overwhelming simply because they are viewed from too narrow a lens. A difficulty that seems unbearable today may be insignificant in a year. A setback that feels devastating in the moment may later be seen as necessary for growth. The Stoics practiced shifting perspective as a way to detach from immediate reactions. They would ask themselves, will this matter in a week, in a month, in a year? By zooming out, the emotional weight of a problem often shrinks. Another technique used by the Stoics is third-person thinking. Instead of engaging with thoughts from a first-person perspective, shift to viewing them as an observer. Instead of saying, I am struggling, reframe it to, he, she is struggling. This creates immediate distance. It allows emotions to be examined without full immersion. Studies have shown that people who engage in third-person self-talk are better at regulating emotions, making decisions under stress, and maintaining composure in difficult situations. By treating thoughts as external rather than personal, they lose their power to overwhelm. Mental distancing isn't about eliminating thoughts, but about reducing their control. A person who is too close to their emotions is constantly pulled in different directions. They react impulsively, get lost in mental loops, and struggle to see situations clearly. But a person who creates space between themselves and their thoughts gains clarity. They don't suppress emotions, nor do they let emotions dictate their actions. They become deliberate rather than reactive. A common misconception is that detachment means indifference, but true mental distancing doesn't lead to apathy, it leads to mastery. It allows for clearer thinking, better decision-making, and a stronger ability to handle adversity. When emotions don't dictate actions, choices become more intentional. When thoughts aren't mistaken for reality, perspective remains intact. The Stoics didn't eliminate emotions. They trained themselves to see emotions without being controlled by them. One of the biggest challenges in mental distancing is overcoming the mind's natural tendency to fixate.